Welcome to Horror Echo, where the shadows whisper and the stories chill you to the bone. Get ready to dive into tales that will keep you up at night. Let the fear begin. 1. The Whispering Woods. In a small town nestled at the edge of a vast forest, there was a legend that no one dared to speak aloud. Locals called it the Whispering Woods. The name came from the eerie phenomenon that occurred every night when the sun set and darkness crept in. Whispers, soft as a breath, would emerge from the trees. At first, they seemed like the rustling of leaves, but if you listened closely, you'd hear them calling your name. Ethan was a skeptic, visiting the town for research on urban legends. His fascination with folklore often brought him to the strangest places, but he didn't believe in ghosts or spirits. He rented a cabin near the edge of the forest and decided to investigate. On the first night, as he lay in bed, the whispers began. It was subtle at first, a faint hum. But soon, the whispers grew distinct, sounding like a chorus of voices calling, "Ethan." Ethan, he brushed it off as his imagination. The second night, the voices grew louder, and he began to hear fragments of sentences. "Come closer, join us." Against his better judgment, he ventured into the woods on the third night. As he walked deeper into the darkness, the whispers surrounded him. His flashlight flickered, then died. Panic set in, and he turned back, but the path had disappeared. The whispers turned into screams, and shadows moved in the periphery of his vision. Ethan was never seen again, but his abandoned cabin still stands, and some say if you listen closely, you can hear him calling for help from the Whispering Woods. 2. The Lonely Motel. Driving through the vast emptiness of rural America, Sarah spotted a lone neon sign flickering in the distance. It was a motel, a tiny, rundown building in the middle of nowhere. Exhausted from hours on the road, she decided to stop for the night. The elderly receptionist greeted her with a strange smile and handed her the key to room 13. The room was old but clean, though the air felt oddly cold. She shrugged it off and climbed into bed. Around 3 a.m., Sarah was awakened by a sound, a faint knock on the door. She froze. Looking through the peephole, she saw nothing. The knocking continued, louder this time. "Who's there?" she called out, but there was no reply. Suddenly, the bathroom light flickered on. Sarah hadn't turned it on. She grabbed her phone and called the front desk, but the line was dead. Summoning her courage, she opened the bathroom door. The mirror was fogged up as if someone had just taken a shower, and words were scrawled into the condensation, "Get out." Terrified, Sarah grabbed her belongings and fled. As she drove away, she glanced back at the motel, but it was gone, only empty land remained. She later learned that the motel had burned down decades ago, with all its guests inside. 3. The Haunting at Pine Hill Asylum. Pine Hill Asylum had been abandoned for years, but locals swore it was still inhabited, just not by the living. Clara and her friends were thrill seekers, always looking for the next haunted spot to explore. The asylum was their ultimate challenge. The group broke in one night, armed with flashlights and cameras. The air was thick with the smell of mildew, and the silence was oppressive. As they wandered through the decaying halls, they began to hear faint footsteps behind them, though no one was there. In one of the patient rooms, Clara found an old journal. Its pages were filled with disturbing drawings and cryptic messages like, "They watch us, and don't trust the shadows." The temperature suddenly dropped, and their flashlights flickered. One of her friends screamed, and they turned to see him being dragged down the hall by an unseen force. Panic erupted, and they ran, but the asylum seemed to twist and change, trapping them in a maze of corridors. When the authorities found Clara days later, she was alone, muttering incoherently. She claimed her friends were still there, trapped with the spirits of Pine Hill Asylum. 4. The stranger in the storm. A heavy storm raged as Mark drove along a desolate highway. The rain poured so hard he could barely see the road ahead. Suddenly, his headlights illuminated a figure standing on the side of the road, drenched but still. Mark hesitated but decided to stop. Rolling down the window, he asked if the man needed help. The stranger, wearing a soaked suit, nodded and got into the car. His presence was unsettling. He was silent, his face pale, and his eyes seemed distant. As they drove, the stranger pointed to an exit, leading them to an old house at the edge of the woods. "This is where I live," he said in a low voice. Relieved to be rid of the unsettling passenger, Mark dropped him off and drove away. But just a mile down the road, he saw the same man standing in the rain again. Confused and terrified, he sped past. That night, Mark couldn't shake the man's image from his mind. The next day, he returned to the house to find answers. An elderly woman answered the door. When Mark described the man, her face turned pale. "That's my son," she said, voice trembling. "He died in a car accident on this road 20 years ago." 5. The Lake of Shadows. Deep in the heart of the Canadian Rockies lies a lake so dark that the locals call it the Lake of Shadows. Shrouded in mist and surrounded by towering evergreens, its black surface mirrors the dense, foreboding forest that seems to guard it jealously. Legends passed down for generations warned that disturbing the lake's waters would awaken the restless spirits trapped beneath. Those who ignored the warnings never returned to tell their tale. Anna, a travel blogger with a love for uncovering the mysterious, stumbled upon the lake during her exploration of the Rockies. She had read vague mentions of it online but found no concrete details. Intrigued by the obscurity, she decided to document her visit. The journey to the lake was treacherous, a winding path barely discernible among the trees. By the time Anna reached the shore, the sun was setting, casting long, skeletal shadows across the water. Setting up her tent near the edge, she marveled at the lake's stillness. There were no ripples, no sound of wildlife, just an oppressive silence. As darkness enveloped the forest, the air grew colder and the mist thickened. She sat by the water, recording her thoughts for her blog, when she noticed something odd. Her reflection in the lake wasn't moving in sync with her. Startled, Anna leaned closer, trying to rationalize what she saw. The reflection began to smile, though her lips stayed firmly closed. The reflection's eyes widened unnaturally, its grin growing until it stretched across its entire face. Panicking, Anna backed away, but her foot slipped and she tumbled into the freezing water. As she struggled to resurface, she felt something grip her ankle, cold, slimy, and unrelenting. She kicked wildly, her lungs burning, but the grip only tightened, pulling her deeper into the abyss. When she finally broke the surface, gasping for air, she was no longer in the same place. The lake was gone, replaced by an endless void of darkness. Whispers surrounded her, soft at first, then growing louder, a cacophony of voices pleading, mocking, and screaming. Shadows darted around her, their forms shifting and melding into grotesque figures. Anna realized she wasn't alone. Dozens of faces emerged from the void, their eyes hollow and their mouths silently screaming. They reached for her, their skeletal hands clawing at her arms and legs. A woman's voice, clear and chilling, echoed in her mind, "You've joined us now. Welcome to the shadows." Back at the lake, her tent remained undisturbed, her belongings untouched. A group of hikers discovered it days later and reported the strange scene to authorities. No trace of Anna was ever found. Her camera, however, was still recording. When the footage was reviewed, the final moments showed her staring into the lake. As she leaned in, the reflection's distorted smile was captured clearly, and then the screen went black. In the background, just before the recording ended, faint whispers could be heard. "Join us. Come to the lake." The legend of the Lake of Shadows lives on, and locals warn anyone daring enough to approach it. The lake is always hungry, and it always takes what it wants.